game I'm going to be talking about for my very first Megadrive Genesis game in this series is Mercs, or to give its original name, Senjo no Okami 2, which basically translates as Wolf of the Battlefield 2. I played this game back when I was a kid and never for a second realised that it was a sequel. In fact, at the time I also didn't realise that it had been an arcade game. The arcade game was developed and published by Capcom in 1990. So about a year later it was on the Megadrive. In fact, it had been one of the games on Capcom's Capcom Play System, CPS arcade hardware. For those interested, in the inside of the arcade machines, the CPS was an interesting bit of kit. It was essentially a large arcade jammer compatible board, with the games then stored on removable sort of ROM cartridges or boards. If you were an arcade operator, you could then buy a new small ROM cart with a different game on it and change this instead of having to buy a whole new large-scale arcade board. It's kind of a little bit like the Neo Geo MVS system SNK used. It's most famous for being the hardware that ran the original Street Fighter 2. I actually own a CPS board, but I only have one ROM board for it, and it's Pang 3. In Japan, Capcom would go on to adapt this CPS system into a console version, and they would make two later sequel boards for their arcades called the CPS 2 and CPS 3. Well, Mercs first came into my life when I got a cheap Japanese copy of it from my local indie games store called Games World. I used to buy a lot of import games from there, because when they were new and they weren't out over here, they were quite expensive, but as soon as the game came out in England, the Japanese versions would be dropped to around £5, and I could usually either buy this with my £5 a week pocket money, or I could just not eat at school and save up dinner money to buy games, which is something I frequently did. I kind of wish I still owned that original Japanese copy, but oh well, at least I still have a cart of it. It was years later that I realised that it had been in the arcades, and that it was in fact the sequel to the 1985 Commando, a game which I actually played in the arcades as well as played a lot of, the port of, on my ZX Sinclair Spectrum. I'm always moaning like heck that various games deserve more sequels, and this one actually got one in 2008 called Wolf of the Battlefield Commando 3, which was a downloadable game for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. I didn't actually play that until I got the Capcom Digital Collection, which was a compilation of digitally released Capcom games which had appeared on the Xbox 360. I'm not reviewing Commando 3 today, but I will say it's a bit of a lesser sequel in my opinion, but still not too bad. So what we have here is the second part of a trilogy, right? Well, the answer to that would be yes and no, I guess. You see, Mercs on the Megadrive wasn't actually made by Capcom at all. It was instead converted by Sega, and they actually made quite a few changes. Now, most people would expect me to say that what happened was that Sega removed a whole bunch of stuff and made a weaker, worse version that their console could easily pull off, right? Well, there's a tiny bit of truth in this, in that the arcade game was a 1 to 3 player third-person shooter game, and well, this game is just a one-player game. Okay, I know people are instantly going to think, oh dear, removing the multiplayer sucks. Just look at how much it affected games like Final Fight on the SNES. But really, I think Sega did more than enough to cover this. Sure, a 2-player mode would have been nice, but there's a lot to recommend about this game. For a start, there are two modes of play. One is called Arcade and the other is called Original. Arcade is basically a one-player conversion of the actual arcade machine. It puts you in the shoes of one particular soldier who can collect various different weapons throughout the different levels. It's good to see the arcade game on offer here, even if it is restricted to just one-player mode. A lot of games would have given you this and then just shrugged off the fact that they cut out the multiplayer and gone, well, it was the best we could do given the hardware. But this isn't an attitude Sega took. The way the arcade mode plays, you basically take your guy and travel vertically up the screen shooting enemy soldiers, vehicles and turrets while trying to take as little damage as possible. At the end of each level there's a boss. For example, at the end of the first level there's a fighter jet which shoots its machine guns down at the cliff you find yourself standing on, and you try to dodge the bullets and take it out. The game plays deliciously old school. It's simple to pick up but with room to master. Basically you move with the D-pad and shoot with one button, and then you have a button which uses what is called the Mega Crash. Basically this is your screen clearing heavy damage bomb type weapon. It tends to be good either when you're surrounded and in danger, or if you want to deal some heavy damage to bosses. The gameplay's really simple. Shoot everything, shoot enemies, shoot item boxes to open them, shoot trees or gates or other things which hinder your progress, and just try to get shot as little as possible yourself. During certain levels you'll be able to get into certain vehicles, as these include tanks, boats and jeeps, and as well as providing a little extra armour to you, they're also great fun and help to break things up a bit. If you enjoy arcade style games, then you're bound to get a fair bit of fun from this. Now, the original mode is a sort of rearranged mode with a few neat touches. Okay, so first off you start with one soldier, you have only one life, and your weapon starts off pretty pathetic. At first you feel seriously underpowered to take on what the game will throw at you. And this is much harder than the arcade mode. In fact, at the end of the first level you basically have to defeat the arcade level 1 boss and take so little damage that you'll have enough life to make your way into the second level. I'd strongly recommend starting with the arcade mode and playing the original as a sort of Game Plus kind of thing. You know, once you're ready for it and trained up. In original mode you won't find any extra lives, but as you progress you'll find fellow soldiers. And these mercs will have different guns. Basically they're the guns you can collect in the arcade mode, but each gun here is tied to a different guy. And once you have more than one you can tactically switch between them, thereby using the right guy for the right situation. As you want to gain more items, the weapons you have will become a lot more powerful, but you need to decide which of your characters needs to pick up what. So you'll be switching between guys to pick up food to heal them, or power up icons to power them up. And these extra guys essentially become your extra lives. But if you only concentrate on powering up one of them, then when he dies, the others are basically screwed. You collect medals on your journey, and these become a form of currency. You can use it in the shops in order to power your guys up. This added mode is a lot tougher to complete, and I feel it adds a heck of a lot more to this title. In fact, when I've gotten the arcade versions of Mercs on various compilations and collections, I've often found myself feeling I'd prefer to have the Megadrive version, which is something you seldom hear about a conversion. It's a shame there's never been an enhanced version of Mercs for later systems. You know, one that would offer all the benefits of both the arcade and the Megadrive versions. For a pretty early Megadrive game, this game's got really good graphics. It's the kind of thing that people would have wrongly called arcade perfect back in the day. They're in fact not identical to the arcade's graphics, but they're quite frankly close enough for me to not care at all. Everything looks correct and runs smoothly, and when you throw in what I find to be a brilliant action-packed soundtrack, it all just fits and offers up what I would personally consider an amazing experience. I've actually found myself humming bits from this game long after I've finished playing it, which for me is always the sign of a good video game soundtrack. As I try my Megadrive games on both a 50Hz and 60Hz console, I want to briefly touch on that in my reviews. As far as Merc goes, it actually doesn't feel much different when played on either setup, although if you do play the game in a Japanese console, you do get the alternative title and the story will be shown in Japanese. Okay, so I suppose it's time to give Mercs a score out of 10. I'd happily give this game 9 out of 10. It's great fun, and as well as bringing the arcade game home, it offers a mode with a little more challenge which helps it last longer as a home experience. I guess it's just the lack of multiplayer which makes it lose out on the 10 out of 10 perfection score for me, but I'd still rather have this than its arcade counterpart. Okay, so if you want to buy this game, how much is it likely to cost you? Well, PAL carts seem to start around the £7 mark, with boxed copies starting at roughly double that. Both of which I think are good prices for this game. Obviously, if you want to give it a bash, I'd advise you to look around and decide if you want a loose cart or a complete copy, and then go for the best one you can find, bearing condition and price in mind. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this review. Have a fantastic day.